It's okay. I'm here for that.
Welcome to Framing the Hammer, the podcast produced by 4A Arts, the American Alliance of Artists and Audiences, where our mission is to change the narrative around arts, culture, design, and craft for American society to ultimately influence how elected leaders at the local, state, and federal levels support and fund them. We engage in stimulating conversations with artists from throughout the creative economy to advance the narrative and social movement we are trying to inspire. Today, our guest is Jason McGatlin, a producer of multiple movies and the meta experience of gaming and storytelling, not the least of which was his time working in the Star Wars franchise. And today we're lucky to have him talking with us about the creative economy, storytelling, and some of his own anecdotes from his experiences. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Thanks for being here. So when I ask you what artwork influenced you as a child, what is that?
Well, you're not talking paintings, I hope, right?
Hey, whatever. It can be a Basquiat, or it could be Star Wars, or it could be a comic book that you loved. What's something from your childhood that you set you on a creative journey?
So, so when I was younger, I wanted to be an astronaut. Totally wanted to be an astronaut. 5 years old, I remember so excited about that. So at 7 years old, my mom knew that. So she took me and my younger brother to go see Star Wars, thinking that would help inspire my, aspirations for an astronaut. That totally screwed everything up. It didn't inspire me to be an astronaut. It affected us in such ways. And again, it's hard for younger kids who don't understand to go to something because it's hard to see a moment, like a watershed moment in time when movies literally just changed the world. That changed the world, not just for cinema, but just in storytelling and visual effects. And it's a moment in time that I'm so glad I got to be a part of. Mm-hmm. 2 7-year-olds sitting in the front aisles with never seeing a movie before in their lives, and then suddenly being blown away with this amazing spectacle that I didn't even know how to comprehend. You walked out there, and I didn't know what filmmaking was. I mean, 7-year-olds, you don't know what that is, but I knew at that moment I had to do that. That's what I have to do. And that kind of started my journey. I remember just then trying to read, we'd go and get books on filmmaking from the library because I just want to understand and just go where it went. And that really was for me a moment in time where I'm like, that did it. And it's funny, I talked to so many filmmakers who are my age who are like, yep, that was right then and there. I knew, right? I knew exactly what I was going to be and what I was going to do. And it's funny because I know when I do interview filmmakers, that some of the people I work with always say it's so cliche, but I'm like, well, if you didn't live it, you don't understand. And I get it. I get what it did. So yeah, that was my. Any other forms of art? I don't know. There's I can tell you about movies throughout time where I can say those were moments in time that really affected me. But that was the moment in time that made me be what I want to be.
That's amazing.
So it's weird. It's weird too to go specifically to say that was the thing that changed me, and then 40 years later or whatever, I ended up producing them because that was, I went into the business specifically knowing I wanted to do Star Wars from that point on. And so the moment I got hired to do it, it was like, this is my life dream. What are you talking about? You can't possibly want me to do this. So,
were you focused on the Star Wars world the entire time in your career, or at some point in your, mid 30s or so, had you forgotten about that dream, or was it always the North Star?
So I'll tell you a story which you can edit out. So Star Wars is always something I wanted to do. I just, again, they did 4, 5, and 6, Star Wars, Empire, Jedi, and then they stopped making them. And then they did, they were going to get ready to do 1, 2, and 3. Before that, they did those reissues. I don't know if you remember. They reshot some pieces of.
Yes, I remember I remember going to see them in the studios as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was working at the Fox lot when they were shooting those reissues on a lot, and I was doing a movie called Volcano, a really horrible Tommy Lee Jones and Hesh movie, and I worked in an office, and some of these names will sound familiar, some of these won't. That particular office is super interesting because Lauren Shuler Donner was the producer. She had two assistants. The first assistant was this guy named Scott Stuber, who is the head creative and runs Netflix now. And her second assistant is this guy named Kevin Feige, who happens to run Marvel. And we all shared the same kind of office space together.
Wow.
And the funny thing is that Kevin is a massive Star Wars fan, like massive Star Wars fan. He loves Star Wars. And I did too at that time. And so we knew this was going on. And so I wanted to get on to episode 1. I was going to, whatever I had to do to get on that show, I was going to do it. So I snuck into the executive suites, went into their like stationery room, and I stole the letterhead that said 20th Century Fox confidential letterhead and confidential envelope. And I wrote a letter to the executive producer on the project, and I'm going to forget his name, Star Wars.
Yeah.
And I wrote this letter that basically said, you know, I remember the words I used. I want this job more than my next breath. What can I do? Here's my resume. And I put it in the confidential letter, and I mailed it up to San Francisco. And, you know, like a week or two went by, and this phone call comes, and it's that guy. It's the producer. And he wants to talk to me. And this is in my production office. And so I remember being at my desk, and, you know, Kevin was standing there, and my sister Mika was there, and we were all standing there. And he was really lovely. He said, "Listen, kid, you have a great resume, and your heart is really in the right place, and I totally understand what you want to do, and I get it. Unfortunately, we're shooting in London. We can't take you with there. But if you keep trying as hard as you can, one day you'll get there." And, you know, it was a big letdown to know I wasn't going to do it. But he kind of let it down, and it kind of became one of the moments in time where I was like, wow, I could really do this. So I kind of forgot about it, continued on my way. And the reason this is weird is because, you know, Kathy got the job. She then offered me the job. And for me to take the job, they had to let that guy go so I could take his job.
Oh, karma.
So weird. I mean, again, the guy wasn't never bad to me, but I was like, oh, that's weird.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's, you know, super weird.
I mean, how often do you pinch yourself, or was there a sense of like, yeah, this is what I was going to do, and here I am, because this is what I
there's the positive, like, it's amazing you got this, it works fantastic, you've always wanted to do this. And then there's the negative. The negative is that, you know, don't befriend your heroes sort of thing. Like,
yes,
because when you're, you know, the perfect time, it's almost Christmas, right? The perfect time season here. What's in the package is so much more interesting than what's when you open it, when it's wrapped, and then when you open it, like, oh my God, that's really what it is. Well, that's kind of what happened to me. Is like, I was so excited by a thing, and then when you got into it and you're like behind the scenes, you're like, and there's Disney issues and creative issues, and suddenly it's like, okay, this is not this like amazing world where things just kind of magically happen and people fight with lightsabers. Now you're fighting with budgets and numbers and, you know, creatives. And so it did unfortunately do what I didn't want to do. It demystified the thing that I wanted to be mystified. And I almost wish I'd never gotten it, because it totally ruined Star Wars for me.
An element of Star Wars that hopefully hasn't been demystified for you, because there is magic in it, is the element of storytelling, which we talk about a lot at 4A Arts, because we are essentially storytellers. Artists are storytellers, no matter what their medium is. And Star Wars has definitely, for decades, it has hit a certain zeitgeist that it is part of our American identity. It is part of our generational identity. And everybody always talks about the storytelling element. And so I'm curious, how do you see the storytelling element of the Star Wars world?
So I'm going to break it into, because there's different versions of people. There's the, you know, George Lucas version of it. George, you know, has always in his mind 9 episodes of Star Wars. He clearly knew, and, you know, he clearly knew where 4, 5, and 6 were. He had that in his mind. He kind of knew what 1, 2, and 3 were, and he very sketchily knew where he was going to go in the end. So he had that mapped out, and he followed that thing. When we came into Star Wars, you know, at that time, George owned the company. I got hired. George was still producing. Disney wasn't involved, and like 6 months later, suddenly we were bought by Disney and the whole thing changed. But when we
Uh-huh.
came in, George kind of outlined what 7, 8, and 9 were going to be. Funny. I was in the room when he was pitching it. At one point, I'm kind of like, well, this is Avatar?
Oh.
Looked like Avatar? And I was like, yeah, okay.
And did
Maybe
you say that to
but I
him?
thought of it first. And I'm like, okay,
Oh.
well, all right. So, I know everybody's like, we want to hear what George's story. Kathy made the right decision, right? Going, we shouldn't retell that story, even if it's getting in Star Wars, because it's been done. And so we ended up, strangely enough, probably breaking news, never been broken. The original director that they were looking for to do Star, maybe I told you already, was Ben Affleck, because at that time he had just done that Argo, and so we were super keen on him, and we were negotiating with him to come do the movie, and then the Jennifer Aniston divorce thing happened, and not Jennifer,
the other one,
whatever,
Jennifer Lopez,
the other Jen, yeah, that whole thing happened, and he just couldn't take it on. So then we were stuck, and so Steven Spielberg and Kathy got together, and that's how we ended up getting JJ involved in the project. And we had been working. Kiri Hart, or Key Creative, had been working prior to that on a story arc, a 3-picture story arc that was kind of outlining this, young girl's journey that was going to take place for it, which eventually became Rey. But there was a plan that was to follow this girl's journey to go whole thing. She was not attached to anybody. She wasn't a Skywalker. She wasn't anything. She was just, another person inside the world that was trying to do this thing. And they brought JJ in, and what you know about JJ is that he's really good about setting it up, but then kind of lets it fall apart at the end. If you watch any of the TV series, by the end of it, you're like, I don't know where this is going. He really wanted to line up this kind of like story of like where it was going to happen. So he decided that he was just going to focus on what episode 7 was going to be. And so he took kind of some of the original story arc that was laid out, which was the kind of Rey story. And then he layered in a bunch of other things, but it broke down into its own component of episode 7. Like, it became its own piece. So, and again, we weren't involved in Disney, and then we were involved in Disney, and suddenly there was all this pressure that we had to hit this date, we had to deliver this movie, we had to make this thing. And, we didn't have a director. We finally got a director on. We were a year before we were supposed to. So everything suddenly just became like panic attack. Like, okay, well, let's just focus on 7, because that's the eyes on the prize that we have to deliver on. And we just kind of pushed 8 and 9. Like, we'll get to those later. We'll get to those when we get to those. And we did that. We just totally focused on trying to get 7 up and going. And a lot of the groundwork that got laid in 7 was never answered. And so that's kind of why you go, oh, the storytelling doesn't hold together, because it was never thought of. Like, it literally wasn't. And the way that, pre-George, George had a layout. Post-George, Kathy grew up under, Steven Spielberg, and, Steven is very much a believer as creative leads. And the way that means is that you're visionary. I'll call it your visionary. You're writing the director. It's their story to be told, right? It's you let them tell the story that they want to tell. And so, and this is absolutely makes 100% sense, and Kathy's way is great. However, inside of a franchise, it becomes problematic because, and you can tell, things become super fragmented, because if you are following the creative's lead of the story they want to tell, and 7, 8, 9 are really strong components of this, they're telling the story that they want to tell, but it doesn't actually have to work with any other story, because they only care about what they care about. So Ryan only cared about 8 and what he wanted to tell in his story. And then JJ came in and wanted to redirect what he thought the story was to be, so he changed the story to go back a different direction. So you kind of see this like jagged edge scenario when you allow the creatives to drive that. And that's, to be 100% honest, that's the mentality of how that process works. It's not a Disney telling anybody. It's creative leads and having them drive that story. We talked about Marvel, and it's very different at Marvel. Marvel is Kevin leads. Kevin tells you what the story's going to be, and you sit in your swim lane, and he finds people that will work his story the way he wants it to be told. And that's great, because Kevin's very clear of the stories he follows.
Hmm.
And you get some great stories. Like Rogue One was a great story told because of the creatives were able to drive the story to where, but it's an independent film that doesn't connect really. I mean, it doesn't need to have a second film or a third film. It sits on its own.
Yeah, it's
So,
just standalone.
so that's the process. It's Star Wars right now exists. And actually, I mean, after I left, like in 2020, they've started to correct that. And they've actually now started to, they put Dave Filoni, who was the head of animation. They brought him in to kind of help wrangle that franchise plan, so that you'll start to see that thread start to be much tighter going forward.
The entire universe will be more cohesive, in other words. But then
Yeah.
what's so fascinating, I think, about Star Wars, and I realize you already have had a life since Star Wars, and thank you for indulging all of us as we go down this path still. But what is interesting is I think, even as a student, as a young student, I studied the hero's journey according to Joseph Campbell and found the connections between that George Lucas had. I mean, he wasn't a lifelong devotee, but between writings of what we think of as the original Star Wars Episode 4, between his drafts, he read Joseph Campbell and he crystallized more of the hero's journey and the idea of the monomyth. And I'm curious, I mean, in terms of the character development, is there any sense of like every single character should be able to have their own hero's journey that could be told separately in Star Wars?
I mean, George definitely felt that every character in his version of it, right? Every character needed to I won't say survive, but to arrive at their journey, and
Mm-hmm.
it can be as minimal as like, I just got through this journey till I saved the universe, right? But
Right.
they all believe in journeys. I think as we start to get kind of more, I keep thinking about more and more problems. That concept is tough. Again, I'll go back to the 7, 8, and 9 journey, right?
Uh-huh.
Again, no one knew where they were going, so no one knew how to thread those needles, and that's why it's really hard to like. Did they actually take a hero's journey, or did they just take a left at the universe and came back around? Because we didn't know where they were going to end up. The only character that actually we all knew was going to go was Ray's arc. We all knew. Well, we didn't know she was going to end up being a Palpatine to a Skywalker. We all knew that she was going to become, a Jedi at the end. That was her hero's journey. Everybody else's journey, we did not know. But it is powerful. Again, that whole writing about heroes, myth, and story is so powerful in terms of storytelling. And Kiri Hart, who's an amazing development executive and producer, lives by that book and understands that philosophy. And she just did that movie, The Creator, with Gareth. She will talk about that as a go-to strategy in any storytelling about where you need to start and what is the myth that you're telling. And it's important in any terms. I mean, if you want to be a screenwriter, studying screenwriting and understanding those past myths are still the future myths. They haven't changed. Some of them barely changed, and it's important to all storytelling.
Yeah. So pivoting a little bit more to your day-to-day when you are a producer, what is your favorite aspect of your producing job? Because I know that, I mean, it seems like, from my understanding, first of all, it seems like there are 87 different kinds of producers on a movie, frankly.
Yeah.
And you've probably been 86 of those, I would imagine. But some of them are money people, and some of them are probably wranglers of different elements. And there's just so much to it. I mean, I guess, let me back up and say, how do you explain what you do, say, to your daughter or her class? And then what is your favorite aspect of producing?
It's funny because I in this business, I literally have done every. I always can say I've done almost every job in this business. I started out as the intern on far and away building the catering tent that the crew used to eat under. And
yes, and catering is important.
Go out. Yeah, I built that thing, and it was at that point where I would literally. It was a horrible job. I have to tell you, a horrible job. I have to get up before the crew got there, so we'd be up 4 a.m. building this tent, and I'd have to be there after the crew got down to take it down. But during the middle of the day, when the tent's up, there's nothing to do. So I would just go talk to people, and I would, what do you do? I would ask and try to, like, I was fascinated by all of it. And so, I was the happiest camper around, because I'm like, so what? I get 12 hours to just watch and learn and befriend people. But anyways, I ended up doing everything. So I went to, instead of going from the creative route to development executive, I went to the production route. So I went through that, went into the production office. I became a production supervisor, production manager, UPM, then a line producer, and then a president of a studio. It's funny because I'm doing a different journey now. So that in my day to day, so particularly with Star Wars, like my job was about building projects. Kathleen Curie would create the I'll call it the creative package. Like, here's the director, here's the story, and here's the script, and then I get that, and I'm like, okay, now I got to go put the team together. I go find all the department heads that build it. I figure out where we're going to shoot it. We come up with a budget and a plan. I schedule it out. We take it all the way through the post-production process, and I actually deliver the physical project, like actually deliver the physical project home. And that was great. Then, I went off and worked at Epic Games in a different capacity, which is basically developing projects in a whole different capacity, which dealt with story but both. It was two components. I was dealing with the practical production, but I was also dealing with the creative and the actual development of that sort of stuff. And then I've now moved on from that. And now what I'm doing is funny. I keep thinking, like, oh, I'm just going to retire and not do anything, but it never seems to end up that way. I actually have people come find me who have projects that they're super interested in trying to get going. They want to work with me.
That's a great situation to be in. It's pretty nice.
Yeah, so I have like 5 different projects in terms of development where, they've come to me and like, either they have an IP and they want me to try to help them try to figure out how to turn it into a TV show, or they have a book they want to figure out how to make it into a movie, or they have a video game they want to figure out how to make into a whole structure. And so, and to be honest with you, that's the part I'm enjoying most right now, because it's literally like, it's at the seed of something. Like, and I this project I'm working with is this German IP I've never even heard before, which turns out to be super popular in Germany, but I didn't know it. And so now I'm trying to figure out, like, how do I make this thing work in the States? Like, how do I make this thing that's like has sold over 1 billion copies in Germany? Like, how does this thing work in a country that doesn't even know it exists, right? So that's fun for me to sit down and take these problems and try to like tackle, like, okay, how do we do that? What are we going to do? What's the strategy? What's the plan? Who's the right creatives? How do we get it to the right people? And how do we exhibit it in a way that makes sense to everybody? So that's what I'm doing now, and that's what I enjoy. I love it, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, the problem-solving aspect is fantastic, even in the process and certainly afterwards when you look back and say, I did that.
Yeah. There's a lot of things I look back and go, I wish I hadn't done that.
Well, do you consider yourself a creative or an artist?
No. I mean, if you've ever read an email from me, you're like, my God, this guy can't spell. So my grandma spelling the children's right. So I wouldn't say that. However, I always like to think of mine as like a big picture creative. One of the projects I'm doing is actually not only just a storytelling, but it's in the actual way that we make it. So reinventing the way that we make and tell stories. So I love taking a bigger step back and looking at it and going, hey, we've talked about this before. So I was a key component with the concept that was used to create the Mandalorian, the kind of LED walls for that. And that basically boiled down to the concept of why are we using green screens? We've used green screens for 100 years. Like, can't we do something different? And sitting down and just trying to go, okay, what can we do? And playing with the concept of that. And I love being able to take simple little things going, well, how do we think differently? How do we make it differently? How do we do it so we can be the next level of the future thing? And then what's the stories that need to work to make that thing happen? And that's kind of one of the projects I'm doing right now. It's literally like, okay, what is the next wave of entertainment going to be? Because we've seen that film is declining attendance because people don't go to our home theaters are the same and everybody's doing that. Streaming is overabundant. Like, what is going to drive people to actually attend the projects and make them? We talked about this before. Star Wars had a watershed moment because it just opened up the experience to a point where you're like, I don't know how to explain this. I don't know what this is.
Yeah.
What is it? We've seen moments of film, theater, of stuff, Hamilton, of Barbie, things that actually are just like the next, like, and so I'm trying to look at that next level of like, okay, what's going to change this medium to the next thing? Like, what is the next version? And that's kind of what I've been doing most of my career, from
Yeah.
motion capture with Tintin to the works we did with Star Wars to the Mandalorian piece, to the stuff that I did with Epic, which was basically blending video games and movies together and making a seamless content between the same thing. All that's kind of what I enjoy doing, is like just, and so creatively I'm like, I don't sit down and just write stories. I sit down and go, how do I change that whole plan and think of it differently?
Right.
So that's kind of more where I sit.
Now, something we talk about at 4A Arts constantly is the creative economy. That
Yep.
we don't exist to just advocate on behalf of ballet dancers and Broadway and Hollywood, for that matter. We're here for all of the elements that make a creative experience, be it person who is creating the art or the person experiencing the art. It's an all-encompassing thing. So the creative economy is everybody that helps the creativity in our country. And movies in themselves are kind of their own microcosm of a microeconomy, aren't they? I mean, you just talked about from catering to costumes to location rentals to, I mean, it's an entire economic
Yeah.
ecosphere. And you as a producer, you are essentially thinking in economic terms, and I don't mean just budgets and financial analysis, but you're thinking in economic terms of, you have to like create a city, populate it, run it, and then dismantle it at the end.
So I literally just had this conversation with somebody. I got put on a committee to talk about filming in the Bay Area, and um, I had this kind of I don't know what's this right word to say, kind of like this realistic conversation with them. And I'll be 100% honest. I'll tell everybody this because I've worked in business long enough, right? The film, and I'm going to talk specifically about film because it's a very
Sure.
specific thing, right? You know, um, I helped create the current film boom that's happening in London, and it was very easy. When we decided to make Star Wars, we knew wherever we were going to place it, there was hundreds of millions, if not billions and billions of dollars that were going to be spent to make those projects, right? So we originally decided we want to shoot in California. So we approached the governor's office at the time, asking if they could help us figure out some sort of, incentivized way to put this, $2 billion worth of economy back into the state. If they would help us, we needed to have some sort of incentives, tax incentives. We needed to have some infrastructure set up, and we needed some other things. And I remember this meeting with this guy. I don't remember the guy's name, but he was in the office and just yelling at me, why would we do this? And I said, what do you mean? He's like, we already have the film industry. Why do we need to give it any more than we have? And I said, because we're going to take money away. And I remember thinking that was so strange. Like the thought that like, oh, we already have it, so why do we need to do anything about it? Made me just go, what? And
Yeah.
so they offered us nothing. We went to London. I met with the premier there, Gordon Cameron. Outlined what we wanted to do, and I have to be honest with you, they literally like, what can we do for you? And I said, here's
Wow.
what's going to go. And he put a team of people around me that were specifically around to try to figure out how to make all the things that I wanted to do work out. And they literally kind
Wow.
of mapped out the incentive, the visual effects credit, the stage setup, the whole thing. That meeting drove billions and billions of dollars, because once they set that up, all these other people could survive on that thing. And I constantly look back going like, what? I can't believe California just, their excuse was we have it, so we don't have to do anything about it, and how much they lost. And I can't tell you how many articles you can read about the film industry in London and how much it has brought to the economy. And they keep increasing the incentive constantly, because they now realize like this is just a massive. It's not. I mean, when you think about films, and you just said it, this right. You got crew members who get per diems and hotels and food, and all the wood and the metal and the labor and like, it's hundreds of millions of dollars per project that go in there. It builds we build an entire training program and stuff like that. So it's just, and that's what's funny about this when I say this, like, I understand what the economy of these things can do. And I mean, I talk in giant projects, but even smaller projects, project by project, they bring jobs, they bring funding, they bring work to And if you have that stupid mentality, like when we have it already, we're not going to do it, then you've lost a ton of money. It's just a ridiculous statement. You lose money 100%.
And just to play devil's advocate for a second, if you're going to some small town somewhere and saying we want some tax incentives and we'll come and make a movie in your local town, there is the other side to saying, well, listen, you're coming in and using our water and using our infrastructure and using our roads and whatnot, and you might be adding to the economy, but you also might be depleting like the local infrastructure. I mean, is there any counterbalance to that, or would you say, listen, the positives are always going to outweigh the negatives, so just give the incentives?
Well, I'll frame it two ways because movies in particular, movies and TV shows, they're short term, right? I mean, we're talking like a movie could last 9 months. So this isn't something that's coming in and just like, TV shows like, when they took Lost to Hawaii and the impact that Lost had on the Hawaii economy, when the catch is that when those things leave, they actually really feel it because suddenly that influx of money disappears and it does. So I don't, although they are, but we also have to be honest. I mean, we have to go in and we want to go shoot in this location. They're like, well, you need to repair the road for it. Okay, we'll pay to repair. I mean, so we get asked to do quite a bit as exchange to have certain things. Like I've done so much infrastructure repairs on things because like we can't afford to do it. You can do it. I'm like, okay, we'll do that to shoot in this place.
Wow.
What I keep kind of pitching now, and I keep trying again. I like to take a problem that no one's thinking about and trying to pitch it. I'm like, the way that the film incentives, and again, this is probably not the place anyone cares to hear this, but the way that the classic
no, this is exactly the place that we want to hear it. Go ahead.
The classic film incentives that exist right now, or any of these incentives, are project to project, right? It means like, hey, Star Wars got one movie got a credit, and I've been trying to explain to people like the problem that you're looking at is that you're investing in short-term incentives, right? You're investing in something tiny with the hope that you get this little return off the little thing. But when I approached Star Wars, what I did differently than what everyone is like, I'm gonna give you 5 years. Give me 5 years of a plan where I can bring a project in for 5 years and you can feel the impact of that 5 years. And I keep saying to people, if you really want to make a difference, don't go to say we're just going to have film incentives and hope that somebody comes there. Go to Netflix or go to Disney and like, we'll give you a 5-year incentive. And what I think about is what Elon Musk did in Vegas. He went to Vegas and said, I'm going to build a Tesla factory if you give me $1 billion in incentives over 10 years to be there. And I'm like, yeah, of course. Give me 10 years of business and I'll show you what it is. I'm like, we're just thinking of it wrong. We're thinking of it as that my little movie needs this thing, but we should be thinking about, no, my business needs this thing. And build a business that goes there and holds it. And and I'm like, that's not in the mentality right now. That's not the way people think. They're always about my film, not my business. And we have to start converting our things to being a business, business opportunities versus a project opportunities. So
yeah, I mean, so often in arts and arts advocacy and whatnot, it's like a mentality of there's only so much, and we all have to grab and pull and hold on to whatever we can
against each other because there's only a certain amount of money that you can certainly have.
But in reality, I mean, there are so many other opportunities to think about it creatively and business opportunistically to enjoy the spoils and spread them around because there is a lot of money out there. So, I mean, going back to London real quick, one last question on that is when they already had massive movie making infrastructure, and yet you, with the Star Wars, what you were trying to create was you needed even more. And what you just highlighted was they were fine with that. And they said, what can we do for you? But I mean, in the midst of all of what you were making, I mean, this is definitely an ignorant frame of mind because I don't know how all of the movie industry works. But I mean, they were making all the Harry Potter movies in London, and yet you still needed even more infrastructure, but they were happy to hand it to you, huh?
So yeah, they were happy to hand it because again, part of what they could realize, again, they make money on this. I have to be honest with you. All the incentives, they don't give money away for the hell of it. They make money on this. So I keep saying this, like, you guys have to do your homework. Like, they don't give incentives because they're just losing money, and they don't keep increasing the incentives because they're losing money. They're giving incentives because they're seeing the wealth on the back end. And if you're short-minded enough just to say we're giving money away, you need to rethink about how you're doing that. And that's the bigger problem you have is like, okay, you're not looking at it the right way. And there is definitely, and it's two paths, right? There's I won't go into London's things, but there's taxation on some of those incentives. So certain by bringing people to London, there are certain taxes that get paid. Those people have to pay to become work in London. That gets funneled back to, including cast actors, that gets funneled back into this incentive from where it comes from. But then there's also return on investment that happens when they start putting, like I said, the hotels, the food, the restaurants,
Yeah.
the drivers, the stuff,
Yeah.
like all that stuff comes back in. They start to spend money. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
compounding effect. And so
It's an economic engine. And this is part of the reason I wanted to come back to it, because we talk about this all the time at 4A Arts, that the return on investment is 5 times, sometimes 10 times what they're investing. And there are so few studies in the United States about what the return on investment can be when you make investments in culture and art and design and craft. Whereas there is a study out of the UK that shows there was a 10 to 1 pound return on investment when, you know, the local elected leaders invested in arts and culture. And it's that is what 4A Arts exists to bring that awareness to the United States, so that hopefully we can invest with confidence and even business acumen.
Well, so, and I know you're going to get other points are done, but I'll tell you
That's
this: because I walked into London and they were shooting us. They were shooting a Harry Potter. They were shooting the Thor movie when I got there, so they were shooting stuff. What we did when we showed up and again, I didn't talk about I'm doing a movie. I literally laid out a 5-year plan. Like, this is, if you can do this, we'll do this, and guaranteed this kind of 5. You know, the 5 movies that I produced over there. These are the 5 movies we're going to produce over there. We'll put the visual effects in there. So we quickly grew the visual effects industry, because we're like, we need to make sure we have a large visual effects industry footprint here. So we need to incentivize so that suddenly started all these companies moving in because they could get the rebate to put the visual effects in there. We expanded Pinewood Studios twofold, so doubled the size of the studio we were there. We had them build an entire additional footprint, which allowed Marvel to move in next door, because now they had that. We started a training program because they were running out of people. So we started training additional people to come in there so we could expand the training program. And we even we worked with the BFI and made a deal where we split the cost of the training so we could actually train people and brought them in there, expanding the pool for the thing. Like, I literally can tell you, from the time I started I saw how that just exploded. In fact, I just got an email from Tim Downing last night because they were celebrating 12 years of Star Wars and what it's done for the industry. And they were having a big party with C-3PO and R2-D2. And I was like, yeah, they understood. They got it. They got the memo and understood it. And they stopped trying to pretend like this is art for art's sake. This is a business. I hate to be, it's like, I get this. I love art. I think this is it. But it's called show business because we are a business. We make money and we sell money. And there's a version of this that works for every economy. It's got to be thoughtful. And that's just the way it works. So,
that's fantastic. So now, being a movie maker, are you ever able to experience movies the same way you did when you were 7 years old?
It's funny. No, I mean, the problem is that I know all the tricks, I know all the effects, I know all the ways. I will tell you the thing that I'm loving right now, which just sounds so weird to say this. I'm such a geek. So I absolutely loved Barbie, and I'll tell you what. They were trying to fake me out with cool visual effects. I mean, it was like I almost call it the low grade version. Like, there was like sets and stuff like that. What got me was, 1, the storytelling, and 2, kind of the emotional journey. I went with my 13-year-old daughter and her best friend and their mother, and I actually didn't want to go. I was like, I really want to see Barbie. We saw it on opening night. They made me wear pink. I was like, I really. And when the Billie Eilish song comes on, they're doing that flashback. I literally was crying because I was so emotionally moved by it, especially with my daughter being right there. It's like,
sure.
I wasn't expecting to feel for that movie and that content to move me the way that it did.
Yeah.
And particularly to walk out of the theater and hear 2 13-year-olds experience the same thing that I did as a kid seeing a movie. Yeah. Being heard as a woman, as a girl's perspective, understanding that stuff and feeling empowered. I mean, the movie really empowered them. So that was one.
Yeah.
And then we talked about this earlier because I'm a Swiftie and I love Taylor Swift. It's funny, I wasn't a Taylor Swift fan until the album Folklore came out, and it was so different to me, and I was obsessed with it. My daughter wasn't a Taylor Swift fan, but because I was listening to Folklore so much, she became one, and so we now have this joint, kind of like connection between this kind of around this Folklore issue, around just Taylor Swift in general. But we again went to go see her movie in the theater, the concert in the theater, the Airstream in the theater. And we went opening night, and again, a moment in time where I was in a theater. It was a big moment for me because it was in a theater where theater culture changed overnight for me. The prim proper, don't talk, don't say anything, don't do anything, but people were dancing and videotaping. I was like, this means something. This is important because now we're seeing something where the idea of just like, what we do at home is sit and watch movies. What we do in a theater is enjoy the company of people around us. And I was like,
Well said.
this is a moment in time that means something. We should be cognizant of what's happening here. So those are the two things this year that have really kind of affected me.
So with mediocre movies, though, that you see, are you insufferable to watch them with because you think, oh, come on, that was a ridiculous effect? Or are you able to turn your mind off and just take the journey with the story being told?
It depends. We just watched this Mark Wahlberg movie on Apple Plus the other night, and
the previews look so good. Frankly, I want to like it, but I'm sure it's terrible.
Well, it's one of those things when you get into it, you're like, we've seen this movie 1,000 times. We know exactly what's going to happen. And, but we watched it as a family, and it's just fun. And when you get to the point where it's just fun, just enjoy it. It's great. Like I don't get into that thing. I do. There are certain movies where I have to do with all the DGA voting for director stuff. So I'm getting all the screeners down. I'm going through all the movies, and you get everything. I mean, you're literally like, oh, and I always have to watch it. Like, do you really think you should be nominated for this one? Because some of them are like, what are you thinking about? So that's when I get uber critical, because then I was like, you're trying to be the best of the best, and you're like, I'm watching for the 13th or whatever it is. So I can get into moments of where I can escape it. Particularly if I didn't work on it or nobody worked on it, because being in the business, pretty much everybody, and so there's always somebody talking about some behind the scenes story about some project, and it always kind of taints that project because you're like, this is when so and so did such and such. I'm like, oh, I can't watch this movie.
Yeah. Can you tell us what mentors or artistic folks that you have worked with that really inspired you to do your best or follow in their footsteps?
I mean, this is going to sound so obvious and cheesy, but I will say, working with Steven Spielberg was, and I worked with him for a couple of movies. The first movie, he didn't even know who that was. He didn't even know my name, know what I did, which was War of the Worlds. And then on this second movie, I got hired to produce it. And it was such an odd experience because that movie took so long to do. We were on that movie for 4 years. The first year and a half, I would have a meeting with him in his office and Kathy Kennedy every Wednesday. And, I had never produced a movie before in my life. Kathy randomly just decided I should produce this movie. You'll be fine. And I don't know why. I was like, what? And we would go into Steven's little office there. He has a kind of conference room on the side there. It's crazy office because in his office he has the original little red sled from Orson Welles' movie on the wall.
Oh, holy cow!
So that
tracks.
Yeah. So Steven would sit at the end of the table. Kathy would sit on one side. I sit on the other side, and then on the video screen, like just now, we'd have Peter Jackson in New Zealand, and we would talk about the movie, blah blah blah.
And can you tell us what movie this is about? This was?
That was the Adventures of TinTin.
Okay.
So we'd be sitting there talking, whatever, prepping, whatever, and Steven would never look at me. The first year and a half, he never even looked at me. He would clearly want to talk about something to be done. He would talk to Kathy, and Kathy then would tell me across the table. And I thought, this is so fucking weird. Like, I'm right here. But he didn't know who I was. I was never introduced to him. Literally, I just showed up and I'd be sitting in the room. No one ever said, this is the guy that's going to produce your movies. Like, Kathy was everything, and I was the guy that just took notes. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
We'll figure that out. So it wasn't until, literally 2 years into the movie, and there's a very complicated story, but I ended up having to move to New Zealand and living there to finish the movie out. and Kathy and Steven went to go do Warhorse. And so there was this moment in time that if he wanted anything done, he actually had to deal with me.
Yeah.
And he would have to call me. And it was always so freaky to get a phone call because he'd just call you directly, like on my cell phone. And there's a time change. So it would always be like 5 a.m. and it's Steven Spielberg calling you. Like, oh my God, what's going on? And I remember taking that first, I've been working with him for 2 years. And the first time he called me, I was freaking out. But we developed, after that, that initial shock, we developed a really great working relationship where, he'd have these epiphanies about storytelling. And I sometimes think this, and it's going to sound horrible. He is a genius. He is a genius filmmaker. But sometimes I think his genius is that he's not afraid to say whatever he wants to say.
I mean, there's a lot to be said for that.
Where I'm always petrified to say something out loud. People are going to laugh at me. He will say whatever. He'll be in a meeting and we were, when you're in the post of these movies, you have like 30 people sitting on a table and they're all on typewriters, literally typing every word you say. And we're doing a review on a sequence, and it is the third act of the movie. And we didn't really know what the third act was going to be. And so Steven's like, wouldn't it be great if this like crane like hooked a shark out of the ocean and then threw it onto the train, and the shark was loose on the train going down the train? I'm literally sitting there going, what are you talking? Like, what are you talking? And everybody in the room is like, And I'm like, am I the only one that's like, what? And so Joe Letteri, who's the visual effects supervisor, we'll get right on that. And I thought, we're going to get on that? Like, what are we talking about? And we finished the meeting. Steven leaves, and we're all in the room. And I looked at Joe, and I'm like, kidding me? He's like, we'll start there, but I guarantee it's going to morph into something else. But he's got something. Let's just figure it out. And so if you watch the movie, we actually previs the shark running down the train. It was the dumbest thing ever. And of course, Steven went, well, that's not working. What if the two cranes started fighting with each other? And so that's what actually came out of the movie. But it started out with a stupid idea. And I was so mortified. Like, we spent money on it. We developed it. But again, it's the kernel of the idea that's important. And being able to vocalize that with confidence, like blah, do the, and you're like, what? He was able to do that. And that's the important part. Like, don't die on the bed. Like, it didn't work. Let's move it. So he was one of my favorite guys to work with. And the other one, which is a different person to work with, was the director of Rogue One, this guy named Gareth Edwards. And it's so different. Why? Two totally different beasts. Gareth, if you don't know anything about him, he was a visual effects, guru in his day. He used to make stuff for BBC. And he directed this movie called Monsters, which was this little low-budget movie he did for $200,000. But he did everything, and he did all the visual effects in the movie himself. Like, he literally shot the movie and then did the visual effects and stuff. And it was one of those epiphany moments sitting with him, because I was like, when we first started doing like the Rogue Ones and Solo stuff, what we were trying to do, which failed miserably, what we were trying to do was what Kathy wanted to do, was she wanted to do this District 9 type movies, like $65 million movies in Star Wars. And so the reason we hired Gareth is like, he'd done this $200,000 movie, like, let's do this low budget Star Wars, kind of like down and dirty, blah, blah, blah. Disney got involved and something was $200 million. Like, but when we started, Gareth's thing, which I thought was just fascinating, is he said to me, we as filmmakers are too precious. And I said, what do you mean? He's like, we pixel fuck the crap out of visual effects because we can, because we're directors and we keep asking for us more and ask more. And you realize, like, after the 10th time of reviewing and sending it back to the shop, you're doing nothing to it. Like, it hasn't changed since the second time, but we have the power and the ability to just keep doing it. And he goes, if you were to say to me that I only get 3 chances at fixing a shot and I had to sign off on the third shot, I'd save you millions and millions of dollars. And so I said, I'm going to challenge you. You watch Rogue, every shot, only three shots. I will go into, if you go into The Force Awakens, we had shots that went 50 times through the windmill. Yeah. But Gareth understood, it's like, we as filmmakers are overdoing our own process. Like, we've become so precious about the process when the story is what matters. Like, he goes, when he did Monsters, there's a sequence of these 2 jet planes go flying over the thing, and he goes, I literally cut out 2 planes from a magazine. I scanned them into the computer, and I dragged them across the screen and just put a sound effect. No one asked.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, you're right. We think that the audience is like picking the films apart. It's us as filmmakers that are picking the films apart. Most people go and then just fall into the story and don't even care.
For the
Right?
story, bringing it full circle, it is about the story. It isn't about the special effects. The special effects help,
Yeah.
but it really is. I mean, a low budget story can be worth more than a $1 billion effect that has no story, huh?
And to your people,
Please.
go watch Monsters and
Okay.
know that was done for $200,000 and realize like it can be done with visual effects and crazy locations and make amazing stories.
And finally, what are you looking forward to in the future culturally? Are you online, or what are you looking
I
forward
can't
to?
tell you, but I will tell you. I can't tell you. So I think I told you the last time we spoke, I had an epiphany about just what I wanted to do with my life. It sounds really strange, kind of like I've been, I'll get into this later once I actually get it farther down. But I had an epiphany about what entertainment was, and I think I told you about, you know, this. I've been doing a lot of this kind of merging of, video games and movies and stuff, and it suddenly hit me what I was doing wrong. I'm not doing wrong. What I wanted to do, what I wanted to do was right. So I kind of put together this kind of pitch plan, which is a twofold thing. It's not a story. It's a way to tell a story and a place to tell a story, and it's two components of a business. And so I pitched it out I literally sat down after we talked and I wrote it up in 3 hours. Wrote up a plan.
Hmm.
I pitched it out to a couple people, and everyone I pitched it to goes, "That's going to change the business." Like that's. And so I'm now starting a company based around this idea of this new idea, this kind of concept I want to do, trying to see if I can figure out how to actually make it happen. So we'll see.
That's
So
very
I'm
exciting.
excited about the future. I'll put it that way. I'm excited about the future of storytelling that is with all the things that we now have at our hands. And again, most of this, what I'm going through is all the stuff I've done in the past. Like all the things, I'm just taking everything I've ever learned and it's like, hey, I've done all this. Let's just figure out how to put it all together and make it something special. So that's what I'm looking forward to because I do see that we're at a moment in time where things need to shift and things will
Yeah.
shift just because of just what's happening. And
Yeah.
we'll see a
I,
whole new brand of entertainment that's just a hybrid of everything we've ever seen, and it'll be awesome.
that's exciting. I can't wait to follow this along as you grow it. So thank you for joining us, Jason. Much appreciated.
Anytime, anytime. Let's talk.